My son stepped in front of me at our Sunday family dinner, pressed his finger against my forehead, and shoved me back as everyone watched. "You're nothing but a parasite, Dad," he said with a smirk. His wife stood beside him, filming every second with a cold, practiced smile. This is exactly what everyone needs to see. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. But later that night, I accidentally overheard a conversation that revealed why they wanted that video so badly. Before sunrise, I made one decision they never imagined, and it changed everything. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means everything. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country. I want to know who is in this community with me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements shaped for reflection and meaningful conversation. Any similarity to actual names or places is entirely coincidental, but everything it says about family loyalty and dignity, that part is yours to keep. My name is Conrad Hale. I am 60 years old. I live alone in a wood frame house on the quiet end of Brentwood, Tennessee, and on the first Sunday of October 2025, I cooked my son his favorite meal. I did not know it would be the last time I ever did. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and browned butter that afternoon. Outside the window, the old maple Margaret had planted in the spring of 1991 had turned a deep, burning amber, the kind of color that made the whole backyard look like it was lit from the inside. I stood at the stove stirring a pot of her beef stew, following her handwritten recipe, the way I had followed it every year since she passed. The index card was soft at the edges, now the ink faded in places, but I knew every line by heart. I had spent 40 years building a business from the ground up. I had signed contracts worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. But standing in that kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, stirring that pot with the wooden spoon Margaret bought at a farmer's market in Franklin back in 2003, that was the closest I ever came to feeling like everything was exactly as it should be. Dorothy Alcott. My neighbor from the White House next door pushed open the back gate just before 5. She was 55, sharp-eyed, with silver hair she wore pulled back and a tendency to say exactly what she thought without apology. I had always liked that about her. "Something smells incredible," she called out, stopping at the kitchen door. "You cooking for the whole street or just the family?" I turned and smiled at her. "Just the family. Beckett and Sloan are coming at 6. Reed and his wife Nora, too. And little Lucas." Dorothy's expression softened at the mention of Lucas, my grandson, 4 years old, the only person in my family who still hugged me like he meant it every single time. "That boy is going to eat you out of house and home one day," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I hope so," I told her honestly. Dorothy leaned against the doorframe, watching me stir. After a moment, the smile eased off her face and something more careful took its place. "You doing all right, Conrad? You look tired. Not your regular tired, the other kind." I set the wooden spoon down on the rest beside the stove and turned to face her fully. My chest felt heavier than it had all week, though I could not have explained exactly why not then. "I'm fine, Dorothy," I said. "Just an old man cooking Sunday dinner." She did not look convinced. She studied me for another few seconds, the way only people who have known you a long time can, reading the things you are not saying out loud. Then she gave a small nod, as if she was filing the information away for later. "You call me if you need anything tonight," she said. "Anything at all." "I will," I promised. After she left, I went back to the stove. I adjusted the heat and turned my attention to the dining room table. Margaret had always set it herself on Sunday evenings, the good plates, the cloth napkins she ironed herself, the small glass vase she kept on the sideboard that she would fill with whatever was blooming in the garden. I had kept up the habit after she was gone. It felt important. Like the table itself was a kind of promise that this family was still worth sitting down together for. I placed a bundle of dried lavender in the vase tonight, since nothing was blooming in October. Then I pulled out Margaret's chair, the one at the head of the table, the one none of us ever sat in, and set it exactly as I always did. A folded napkin, a glass of water, as if she might walk in any moment and take her place. My throat tightened a little the way it always did when I did that. Not with grief exactly, more like longing. The kind that sits low and steady, the kind you learn to carry rather than put down. I had given Beckett everything I could give him over the years. The house he lived in, a 4-bedroom property in Belle Meade, I had purchased outright through my LLC and allowed him to use rent-free. The SUV in his driveway that was registered in my name. The credit card I had linked to my account when his own credit fell apart 3 years ago. The business loan I had quietly guaranteed when his investment fund needed breathing room. I had done all of it without being asked and without making him feel small, because that is what fathers do. At least that is what I believed. I heard tires on the driveway at 5:58. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, straightened my collar, and walked to the front door. Through the side window, I could see Beckett stepping out of the SUV, tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who looked successful from a distance. Sloane came around from the passenger side in a cream-colored blazer, her phone already in her hand. Something moved through my chest, then not a thought exactly, more like a vibration. A low, wordless unease I could not name. I pushed it aside. I opened the door. I smiled. "Come on in," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." I had spent the whole afternoon cooking for the people I loved. What I did not know yet was that some of them had spent the whole week preparing something else entirely, and I was the main ingredient. But before I tell you what happened at that dinner table, I need to take you back 3 weeks. Because the story of that Sunday night did not begin on Sunday. It began on a Tuesday morning in the middle of September with a phone call that made the coffee in my hand go cold before I took a single sip. I had been sitting in my old office on 5th Avenue South in downtown Nashville, a space I kept partly out of habit and partly because I could not bring myself to give up the desk where I had made every important decision of my adult life. The morning light came through the blinds in long strips across the floor. I had a cup of coffee, a legal pad, and no particular reason to feel anything other than calm. Then my phone rang. The screen read, "Miles Carver, First Cumberland Bank." Miles Carver had been the branch director at First Cumberland for 11 years. He was the kind of banker who remembered your birthday and your children's names and never made you feel like a number on a spreadsheet. I had trusted him with my accounts for over a decade. I picked up. "Miles, good morning, Conrad." His voice was careful, the kind of careful that means a man is choosing each word before he releases it. "I'm glad I caught you. I need to ask you about something, and I want to handle this quietly." My hand tightened around the phone. "Go ahead." "We received a loan application yesterday," Miles said. $280,000. Commercial financing. The applicant name on the file is yours. The signature matches yours very closely. He paused. "Conrad, did you submit a loan application to this branch in the last 2 weeks?" The coffee cup in my other hand suddenly felt very heavy. I set it down on the desk carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. "No," I said, "I did not." I heard Miles exhale, not with surprise, but with the particular relief of a man whose suspicion has just been confirmed. "That is what I thought. I am going to flag this file and hold it pending your review. I want you to come in this week so we can document this properly." "I'll be there Thursday," I told him. "Miles, keep this between us for now. Do not process anything under my name until I say otherwise." "Understood," he said. "Conrad, be careful." I put the phone down and sat very still for a long moment. My jaw was tight. There was a pressure behind my sternum that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with the slow, awful recognition of something I had been trying not to name for weeks. I did not have to wait long for the second piece. Patrice Holloway had been my executive assistant for 14 years before I retired. She was 52, meticulous and fiercely loyal, in the quiet way that people who are good at their jobs tend to be. She still worked part-time managing the administrative side of two small businesses I had kept on after retirement, and she still had access to my old filing systems. She appeared at my office door 40 minutes after Miles called a manila envelope, pressed flat against her chest, her expression doing something complicated that landed somewhere between worried and furious. "I found this in the shared drive this morning," she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Under your name, in a folder I have never seen before." She held the envelope out. Her hand was trembling slightly. "Conrad, I did not put this there, and I do not think you did either." I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of a partial asset transfer document, a form that, if completed and filed, would redirect a portion of my remaining business holdings to a secondary LLC I had never established. At the bottom of the page, in the signature field, was a version of my signature. Clean, confident, convincing, and completely false. My stomach dropped the way it does when the ground shifts under you before you have time to brace. I looked at that signature for a long time, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30, and I felt something cold settle into the center of my chest and stay there. "Thank you, Patrice," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You did the right thing bringing this to me. I need you to make one copy of everything in this envelope and then lock the originals in the cabinet in my private office. Tell no one." Patrice nodded, but her eyes were glistening. "Conrad, who would do this?" I folded the envelope closed and looked at her directly. "I'm going to find out." By 3 that afternoon, I was sitting across from Warren Aldridge in his office on Church Street. Warren had been my personal attorney for 16 years, a trim, silver-haired man of 58 who had the kind of face that gave nothing away and the kind of mind that gave everything away about whoever was sitting across from him. I laid out everything on his desk. The phone call from Miles, the document Patrice had found, the forged signature. Warren studied each piece without rushing, his reading glasses low on his nose, his expression unreadable. When he finally set the last page down, he took his glasses off and looked at me squarely. "Whoever is doing this has had access to your financial records for a significant amount of time," he said. "The signature is practiced. This is not someone who copied it once. They have studied it. The LLC structure they are referencing in this document is accurate down to the filing details." He paused, letting the weight of that land fully before he continued. "Conrad, how well do you really know everyone around you?" The question hit me somewhere behind the ribs. Not because I did not understand it, but because the honest answer, the one I had been pressing down since the moment Miles called that morning, was sitting in my chest like a stone I was not ready to put on the table yet. "I'm working on that answer," I told Warren quietly. "Give me a few days." Warren studied me for a moment longer, and then he nodded once, slowly, deliberately, the way a man nods when he understands that some truths need a little more time before they can be spoken out loud. I drove home through downtown Nashville as the city shifted into evening. The lights of the honky-tonks on Broadway glowed amber through my windshield. My hands were steady on the wheel, but somewhere under my ribs, the stone had not moved an inch. There was only one person in the world who had access to all of that. One person who knew my accounts, my filing systems, my signature. One person who had been inside my financial life for years because I had opened the door and invited him in. Saying his name even just inside my own head on that drive home felt like something I could not take back once I did it. So I did not say it. Not yet. But I knew. The morning after I met with Warren, I sat in front of a cup of coffee that went cold before I touched it. I had a notepad open on the kitchen table. At the top, I had written 2 words in capital letters, "Protect everything." Below that, a list. And every item on that list felt like an admission I had been avoiding for longer than I wanted to admit. I called Warren at 8:15. He picked up on the second ring. "I want to move on everything we discussed," I told him. All of it. Today, if possible. I had a feeling you would say that, Warren said, and I could hear him already pulling papers across his desk. Come in at 10. We will get started. I was in his office by 9:55. What followed was two of the most methodical and quietly painful hours of my adult life. Warren walked me through every step with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years protecting people from exactly this kind of situation. We began with the irrevocable trust, a legal structure that Warren explained carefully would place the majority of my assets beyond the reach of any court-appointed guardianship proceeding. Once assets are transferred into an irrevocable trust in Tennessee, they no longer belong to the individual in the traditional sense. They belong to the trust, which means no one, not a son, not a daughter-in-law, not a judge responding to a competency petition, can touch them without the trustee's authorization. I had named Warren himself as trustee. You understand that once this is done, you cannot reverse it unilaterally, Warren said, sliding the document across the desk toward me. I understand, I said. My voice was steady. My pen hand was not, but I did not let it show. I signed. After that, Warren helped me lock down every shared financial account, change the access credentials on my primary banking systems, and formally revoke the secondary signatory permissions I had extended to Beckett 3 years earlier, when I thought I was helping him. Each step felt like closing a door I should have closed a long time ago. Each step also felt like grieving something, the version of my son I had wanted him to be, the trust I had extended so freely and for so long. Then Warren brought up the camera system. I want to install a high-definition recording unit in your home office, he said. Motion-activated, cloud-linked with a live feed I can access remotely if needed. Conrad, if someone comes into that house uninvited, I want every second of it documented and stored off-site where it cannot be tampered with. I nodded. Do it. Then I said the thing I had been turning over in my mind since the night before. Warren, the back door lock, the one off the kitchen hallway. What about it? Leave it exactly as it is, I said. Do not change it. Warren looked at me over the top of his glasses for a long moment. A slow understanding moved across his face. Not surprise, but the particular recognition of a man watching another man play a much longer game than he initially appeared to be playing. All right, Warren said simply. Exactly as it is. The camera was installed that same afternoon by a technician Warren trusted. By evening, my home office at Brentwood was one of the most quietly well-documented rooms in Davidson County, and the back door lock was exactly as it had always been. I had one more thing to do before Sunday. The hardest thing. I drove to Belle Meade that Thursday afternoon, to the house I had purchased outright 11 years ago, the one registered under my LLC, the one Beckett and Sloan had been living in rent-free while posting photographs of their lifestyle online as though they had built it themselves. I did not go to see Beckett. I went to see Lucas. My grandson was 4 years old. He had his mother's dark eyes and his grandmother Margaret's laugh, this enormous whole-body laugh that seemed too large for such a small person. When I came through the side gate into the backyard, he was crouched near the flower bed with a plastic trowel, completely absorbed in the serious business of moving dirt from one place to another. He looked up and his whole face split open with joy. "Grandpa!" He dropped the trowel and ran at me with the kind of full-speed, arms-wide abandon that only very small children and very large dogs can manage without embarrassment. I caught him and swung him up and held on longer than usual, pressing my cheek against the top of his head, breathing in the smell of grass and sunscreen and childhood. "Hey, buddy," I managed. My throat had gone rough without warning. We spent an hour in that backyard together. Lucas showed me a beetle he had found under a rock and gave it a name I could not pronounce. He made me sit in the small plastic lawn chair that was approximately 1/3 the size required for a 60-year-old man and served me imaginary tea in a plastic cup with enormous ceremony. I drank every drop. At some point, He looked up at me with those serious dark eyes and said, "Grandpa, are you sad?" The question hit me somewhere I had not expected. I felt my eyes go hot and had to look away for a second toward the oak tree at the back fence before I could answer him. "No, buddy," I said, my voice coming out a little rougher than I intended. "Grandpa is just thinking." Lucas considered this with great seriousness, then patted my knee with his small, dirt-covered hand. "Okay," he said, apparently satisfied, and went back to his beetle. I watched him crouch down in the dirt again, so small, so completely unaware of everything that was happening around him. He had done nothing wrong. He had inherited nothing except the bad luck of being born into the middle of a story that was about to get very difficult for everyone involved. When I finally stood up to leave, I looked at the house one more time. The clean white facade, the landscaped beds, the 2 expensive cars in the driveway. I had paid for all of it. Every brick and blade of grass. As I walked back through the side gate, I said quietly to no one in particular, "I am doing this for you too, buddy, even if you will never understand why." I drove back to Brentwood with the windows down. The air smelled like fallen leaves and coming cold. Sunday was 4 days away. The trust was locked. The camera was running. The back door lock was exactly as it had always been. Everything was in place. All I had to do now was cook. Sunday arrived the way Sundays always did in Brentwood, quietly, with good light. By 5:30, the stew was simmering low, and the dining room table was set the way Margaret would have wanted it. I had placed the dried lavender in her glass vase, folded the cloth napkins into neat rectangles, and pulled out her chair at the head of the table the way I always did. The house smelled warm and familiar. For a little while, standing in the kitchen doorway and looking at that table, I almost let myself believe the evening would be ordinary. The first car pulled into the driveway at 5:55. Reed and Nora arrived together. Reed at 30 was quieter than his older brother, the kind of young man who filled space without demanding attention. His wife Nora was 29, gentle-faced and soft-spoken, the sort of person who noticed when someone else needed more water in their glass before they asked. They came in carrying a bottle of wine, and Lucas reached for me the moment he cleared the doorway, arms stretched wide, making the particular sound that small children make when they see someone they are genuinely glad to see. I held him for a long moment. His small hands patted my back enthusiastically. "Grandpa, I found another beetle," he announced directly into my ear at considerable volume. "Tell me everything," I said. Beckett and Sloan arrived at 6:02. Beckett came through the front door in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than most people's rent. His jaw was set in a way I recognized not the tension of a man running late, but the tension of a man who had already decided how the evening was going to go. Sloan followed close behind in a cream blazer, her phone already in her hand, her eyes moving around the room with a quick assessing quality that I noticed but did not comment on. My Uncle Everett Hale, 74 years old, broad-shouldered even now, with white hair and the kind of unhurried authority that comes from having outlived most of the things people worry about, was already seated at the far end of the table with a glass of sweet tea. He had driven up from Columbia that afternoon the way he did every few months, because he said city people forgot how to sit still and someone had to remind them. We sat down. I brought the stew out. Nora helped with the bread. For approximately 7 minutes, it looked like a normal family dinner. Then Beckett reached down beside his chair and lifted a manila folder onto the table. He set it in the center between the bread basket and the water pitcher, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed the gesture. "Dad," he said, his voice measured and smooth, "I need you to look at something. It is just some paperwork restructuring the way your assets are managed. Makes things simpler for everyone going forward." I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it immediately. Something in my chest pulled tight, like a wire being wound one turn too many. "What kind of restructuring?" I asked. "Just a power of attorney arrangement," Beckett said, gesturing toward the folder. "Standard stuff." It lets me handle things on your behalf so you do not have to deal with the administrative side anymore. You have earned the right to step back, Dad. I reached out and opened the folder. I turned the first page, then the second, then the third. It was not a standard power of attorney. It was a comprehensive asset transfer authorization, a document that, if signed, would hand Beckett effective control over my remaining business holdings, my primary bank accounts, and the property portfolio I had spent 4 decades building. The language was careful and technical, and designed to look routine to someone who was not paying close attention. I was paying very close attention. I closed the folder and placed my hands flat on the table on either side of it. I have never said I wanted anyone managing my assets on my behalf, I said. My voice came out even, and I am not going to sign this. The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Beckett's measured expression cracked, not slowly, all at once, like a plate hitting a tile floor. He pushed his chair back and stood up. The scrape of the chair legs against the hardwood was very loud in the sudden silence. He walked around the table toward me with long, deliberate strides and stopped directly in front of my chair. I looked up at him. He was breathing hard through his nose. Then he pressed his index finger against my forehead and pushed, not hard enough to knock me backward, but hard enough that I had to grip the armrests to keep my posture. Hard enough that everyone at that table felt it. "Look at yourself," Beckett said, his voice dropping to something low and cutting. "You are a 60-year-old man sitting alone in a house that is too big for you, cooking dinner for people who have moved on with their lives. You think you are still relevant. You think any of this," he gestured broadly at the room, "is because of you." Nora made a small, sharp sound. Reed stared down at his plate, his face flushed dark red. Everett's hand tightened around his glass of sweet tea until his knuckles went white. Beckett was not finished. "You are a dead weight," he said, each word landing like something thrown. "You are a parasite draining this family dry. And if you had any dignity left, you would pick up that pen and sign." From across the table, Sloane stood up from her chair. She did it smoothly, without urgency, the way someone stands up when they have been waiting for their cue. She reached into the pocket of her cream blazer and produced her phone. She opened the camera. The small red recording light blinked on. Everett slammed his palm down on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. "Beckett!" His voice came out like gravel and thunder mixed together. "You take your hand off your father right now. You hear me right now." Beckett turned to look at his great-uncle with an expression that was almost amused. "Stay out of this, old man." "I will not stay out of a single thing," Everett shot back, his voice shaking with fury. "Your mother would be sick to her stomach watching you right now. Sick." Lucas, still in his high chair, had stopped eating. His lower lip was trembling. His eyes were moving between his father and his grandfather with the wide, confused expression of a child who does not understand what is wrong, but understands completely that something is. I reached over and put my hand gently on Lucas's arm. "It is okay, buddy," I said quietly, though it was not okay, and we both knew it. That was when Sloane shifted the angle of her phone, adjusting the frame to capture my face more clearly. And as she tilted the screen toward her, I caught a glimpse of what was on it. Not the camera view, a text message thread. And in the most recent bubble, 3 words in plain black text. "Step 1 is done." The words were already sent. She had typed them and sent them before Beckett even stood up from his chair. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. Something much colder than anger moved through me instead, the specific, clarifying chill of a man who has just had every suspicion he carried confirmed in a single moment. This was not a dinner. This was never a dinner. Every word Beckett had just said, every jab of that finger, every calculated second of Sloane's recording, it had all been written in advance, rehearsed, performed, and somewhere behind me in the corner of my office down the hall, a small red light was blinking quietly in the dark. The dishes were still on the table when everyone left. Nobody offered to help clean up. Not Reed, not Nora, not even Everett, who had squeezed my shoulder on his way out and said, "Don't let them do this to you, Conrad," before disappearing down the front steps without another word. The house, my house, the one Margaret and I had picked out together 31 years ago, felt hollowed out like something had been scooped from its center and carried away in Beckett's briefcase. I stood at the kitchen sink and ran the hot water until steam clouded the window above the faucet. Outside, the old oak in the backyard had started dropping its leaves early. Margaret used to say that meant a hard winter was coming. I never knew if she believed it or just liked saying it, but I thought about it now as I watched a single amber leaf spiral down and disappear into the dark. My chest still hurt where Beckett had pressed his finger. Not from the force, he hadn't hit me, not technically, but from the repetition of it. 11 times. 11 deliberate, calculated jabs, each one punctuating a word he'd been rehearsing for God knows how long. You are a parasite. I kept replaying it not because I wanted to, but because my mind wouldn't let it go, kept turning it over like a stone it expected to find something underneath. I thought I had prepared for the worst. Warren had warned me. Miles had warned me. Even my own gut, that low, persistent unease that had been sitting in my stomach for the better part of 6 weeks, had been warning me. But knowing something is coming and watching it arrive are two entirely different kinds of pain. I turned off the water and dried my hands. That was when I heard them. The back door, the one off the kitchen that leads to the side yard and the driveway, had a peculiar acoustic quality. Sound traveled through it strangely, especially on cool nights when the air was still. I had noticed it years ago and never bothered to fix it because Margaret had liked it. She said it made her feel connected to the neighborhood, like she could always hear what the world was doing just outside. Tonight, what the world was doing just outside was Beckett and Sloane standing beside their car, voices low, but not low enough. I did not move to the door. I stood exactly where I was, 3 feet from the window, and I listened. But didn't sign, Sloane was saying. Her voice had a clipped, efficient quality that I had never noticed before, the way it sounded when she was not performing warmth for an audience. We need to rethink the timeline. He'll sign. Beckett's voice was flat and certain in the way of a man who had convinced himself. He's rattled. Give it a week. We don't have a week, Beckett. Travis called me again this afternoon. 48 hours, he said. After that, he goes to collections and it becomes public record. A pause. My hands tightened around the dish towel. Then we move to the next option, Beckett said. Which one? The competency angle. I talked to that guy in Germantown, the one Whitfield recommended. He says if we have footage of Conrad appearing disoriented or aggressive, we can petition for guardianship. It's a civil proceeding. Conrad wouldn't even have the right to. I have footage. Sloane's voice dropped even lower, but the stillness of the night carried it perfectly. From tonight. And I have the other clips I've been putting together for the last 3 weeks. It's enough to start the petition. My stomach turned to ice. 3 weeks. She had been building a case against me for 3 weeks, quietly, methodically, while eating at my table and letting Lucas call me Grandpa, and smiling at me over Sunday dinners like she meant it. How long does the petition take? Beckett asked. 4 to 6 weeks if we push it. Warren could slow it down if Conrad goes to him, but by then we'd already have temporary control of the accounts, the house, everything. She paused. You just have to stay calm and let me handle the legal pieces. I'm calm, Beckett said, but the way he said it told me he was not calm at all. He was terrified. Whatever Travis was holding over them, whatever that 48 hours meant, it was eating him alive, and Sloane was the only thing holding the plan together. I heard a car door open. What about Reed? Sloane asked. Reed does what he's told. Another door. An engine starting. The crunch of tires on the driveway, and then they were gone. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, not moving, the dish towel still in my hands. The steam from the faucet long since faded. The house was completely quiet now. The clock above the stove read 8:47. 3 weeks of footage. A guardianship petition. A man named Travis with a 48-hour deadline. And somewhere in all of it, my son, the boy I had watched take his first steps on this very floor, had decided that the fastest way to solve his problems was to have a court declare his father incompetent. I set the dish towel down on the counter. I picked up my phone and called Warren. He answered on the second ring, and before he could say a word, I said, "I need you to come over tomorrow morning, early, and bring everything." Warren Aldridge arrived at 7:15 with a leather briefcase, a thermos of black coffee, and the particular expression he reserved for situations he considered serious. Eyebrows slightly drawn, mouth set in a flat, careful line. The look of a man who had spent 30 years reading the fine print that other people skipped. I had the back porch door open before he reached the steps. "You look like you haven't slept," he said, setting the briefcase on the kitchen table and clicking it open without ceremony. "I slept 2 hours," I said. "Maybe 3. "Tell me what you heard," I told him. "All of it." Sloane's clipped voice, the mention of Travis and the 48-hour deadline, the footage she had been compiling for 3 weeks, the man in Germantown who had apparently advised them on the guardianship angle. I told it in the order I remembered it without editorializing the way Warren had taught me years ago when we were navigating the sale of the Gallatin Road property, and I had wanted to vent instead of strategize. "Facts first," he used to say. "Feelings are for after we win." Warren listened without interrupting. When I finished, he poured 2 cups of coffee from his thermos, slid one across the table toward me, and sat down. "The guardianship petition," he said. "That's the part that concerns me most. More than the footage is a problem we can address. A petition for guardianship, if filed in Davidson County and assigned to the wrong judge, can move faster than people expect." He wrapped both hands around his cup. Tennessee Code annotated Section 34-3-105, a court can appoint a temporary conservator with emergency authority if the petitioner presents convincing evidence of imminent harm or financial vulnerability. The standard is not as high as people assume. If Sloane has 3 weeks of curated video showing you appearing confused, angry, or unstable, "I am not confused," I said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I know that," Warren said calmly without flinching. "But a judge seeing those clips out of context doesn't know that. And by the time we could contest it, Beckett could have temporary control of your liquid accounts." He paused. "How much is sitting in the operational checking account?" "Around 90,000, Warren nodded slowly. "We need to move that today, not tomorrow. Today." I had known Warren for 22 years. We had navigated property disputes, a wrongful termination suit from a former employee who had been caught stealing from the supply warehouse, and the long grinding process of restructuring the LLC after the 2008 downturn. In all that time, I had never heard him say today, with quite that weight behind it. "The trust is already in place," I said. "The irrevocable trust protects the real estate holdings and the long-term assets, yes. But the operating account isn't inside the trust structure. It's still directly under your name." He opened the briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "I took the liberty last night after you called of pulling the current account summary. I hope you don't mind." "I don't mind." He laid the folder open on the table between us. I looked at the numbers without touching the pages. It was a habit I had developed over decades of deal-making. Let the numbers sit there, don't reach for them, don't let anyone in the room see how much you want to control them. "Here is what I recommend," Warren said. "We transfer the operating funds into a restricted sub-account under the trust umbrella today. I can have the paperwork drafted within the hour and filed before noon. That effectively removes it from any conservatorship claim." He turned a page. "Second, and this is important, Conrad, I need you to submit to a voluntary cognitive evaluation, a formal one conducted by a licensed neuropsychologist, ideally someone the court already recognizes." I looked up from the folder. "You want me to take a mental competency test?" I want you to take it before they ask a court to order one." He held my gaze without apology. "If you come in with a clean voluntary evaluation from a credentialed professional, it removes their primary weapon. They cannot argue diminished capacity when you have a signed report from Dr. Ellen Marsh at Vanderbilt saying you scored in the top percentile for executive function." Ellen Marsh. I turned the name over. Margaret's old colleague. She retired from clinical practice 2 years ago, but she still consults for the Davidson County courts. Her signature on an evaluation carries weight. He tapped the edge of the folder. "I already called her this morning. She can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon if you're willing." I sat back in my chair and looked out through the kitchen window at the backyard. The oak tree was dropping more leaves now, the pale morning light catching them as they turned. I thought about Beckett standing in my dining room the night before, pressing his finger into my chest, and Sloane's voice drifting through the back door, low and efficient, and utterly without warmth. I thought about everything I had already quietly put in place over the past 3 weeks. The cameras, the trust amendments, the separate documentation Warren and I had begun assembling after Miles first called. I had prepared for a confrontation. I had not fully prepared for a courtroom. 2 o'clock, I said. 2 o'clock, Warren confirmed. He reached into the briefcase again and produced a second folder thinner than the first, and set it on the table with a deliberate care that made me pay attention. "There is one more thing," he said. "Something I found yesterday evening that you need to see." He opened the folder and turned it to face me. I looked at the document inside, and the coffee cup in my hand went very, very still. The document was a credit application. Not an unusual thing on its own. Credit applications crossed Warren's desk regularly, and mine and the desks of anyone who had spent a career in business. But this one had my signature on it. My name, my LLC's tax identification number, my Brentwood address, and a neat, confident signature in blue ink that I had never written. It was dated September 19th. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "Miles Carver flagged it," Warren said. "The application was submitted to a regional lending firm in Murfreesboro, not one of your usual institutions. The loan amount requested was $280,000 secured against the Brentwood property." He paused to let that land. Miles recognized the LLC name and called me directly rather than processing it. The application never went through. I set the coffee cup down on the table before my hand could betray me. September 19th. 2 full weeks before the Sunday dinner. Beckett had been sitting across from me at that same kitchen table, asking about my knee, telling me Lucas had started recognizing letters, passing the breadbasket, like a man with nothing on his conscience. And all the while his wife had been submitting fraudulent loan applications in my name to a lender 45 minutes south of Nashville. "This is forgery," I said. "It is," Warren said. "Specifically, it falls under Tennessee Code Annotated 39-14-114 fraudulent use of a financial instrument, which carries a Class B felony classification. Combined with the identity theft statute 39-14-150, we are looking at potential consecutive sentences." He closed the folder with the same deliberate care he had used to open it. "I want you to understand something, Conrad. This document, the footage Sloane has been compiling, the guardianship petition, they are planning, none of these things exist in isolation. This is a coordinated effort. It has been in motion for at least 3 weeks, possibly longer." I stood up from the table. I did not pace. I had never been a pacer. It was a habit that Margaret used to tease me about, the way I always went, very still, when I was angry instead of moving. But I walked to the window and stood there with my back to Warren for a moment, looking out at the oak tree and the pale Monday morning sky. 34 years. That was how long I had been Beckett's father. I had been in the delivery room when he arrived, red-faced and furious at the world, and I had held him against my chest at 2 in the morning when the colic kept him awake, and I had sat in the third row of his high school graduation in the June heat and felt something so large and proud inside my chest that I had not trusted myself to speak. And now he was filing fraudulent loan applications against my property and planning to have a court declare me incompetent so he could empty my accounts before a private lender came collecting. I turned back to the table. "Call Patrice," I said. "Tell her I need the full account list, every authorized signatory on every account under the LLC umbrella. Cards, lines of credit, everything." Warren was already reaching for his phone. "I anticipated that. She'll have it ready within the hour." "Good." I sat back down and pulled the credit application folder toward me. "While we wait, walk me through the trust amendment process. I want the operating account inside the trust structure before noon, the way you said." What followed was 2 hours of the most focused work I had done in years. Warren and I sat at that kitchen table while the morning light shifted and strengthened across the floor, and we went through every financial thread that connected my name to Beckett's life. There were more of them than I had fully appreciated until I saw them laid out in Patrice's careful spreadsheet, which arrived by secure email at 8:53. The Belle Meade property, the house I had bought them as a wedding gift, titled in Beckett's name, but with a private deed of trust that I had quietly retained as a condition of the original transfer, was the largest asset. Warren confirmed that the deed of trust gave me full legal standing to initiate a forced sale if the primary obligor defaulted on the agreed maintenance terms, which Beckett had not met for 14 months. There were also 2 joint credit cards, one personal, one business, both with Beckett listed as an authorized user under my account number. A corporate American Express tied to the Palm Nashville's operating expenses. A standing monthly transfer of $4,000 into Beckett and Sloan's joint checking account, set up 3 years ago as what I had told myself was temporary support while his restaurant found its footing. I looked at the monthly transfer line and felt something tighten behind my eyes. 3 years. $48,000 quietly moved into their account every 12 months while they built their life in Belle Meade, and Sloan posted photographs of their kitchen renovation on the internet, and Beckett told anyone who would listen that he was a self-made man. "Revoke all authorized user statuses today," I told Warren. "All of them. The cards, the corporate account, the line of credit tied to the restaurant." I moved my finger down the spreadsheet. "Cancel the standing transfer." "Done." Warren made a note. The Belle Meade property. I looked at the deed of trust documentation for a long moment. "Start the forced sale process," I said, quietly. "I don't want anything filed publicly until we're ready." Warren nodded and kept writing. At 11:47, the trust amendment was filed and confirmed. At 12:03, I received an automated notification that all authorized user accounts had been deactivated. At 12:31, Patrice sent a single-line message. "Everything is done, Mr. Hale. The accounts are clean." I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the table. In a few hours, Beckett would reach for his corporate card at lunch and find nothing there. Sloan would try to book something on the personal card and get a polite decline. The standing transfer, which hit their account on the 8th of every month, would not arrive this cycle or any cycle after it. They had spent 3 weeks building a trap for me. I had spent one morning quietly removing every floor they were standing on. I picked up my keys, told Warren I would meet him back here after my 2 o'clock appointment with Dr. Marsh, and walked out to my car in the cool October air. The Vanderbilt Neuroscience Building smelled the way all academic buildings smell: old paper, industrial floor cleaner, and the particular staleness of recycled air that has been breathed by too many anxious people over too many decades. I sat in the waiting area on the 4th floor, with my hands folded in my lap, and watched a young woman at the reception desk sort through a stack of manila folders without looking up. I had not been inside this building since Margaret's memorial lecture 3 years ago. The department had named a seminar room after her. I had stood at the back of that room for 2 hours, watching colleagues and former students speak about her work. and I had kept my expression steady and my hands still, and told myself that grief was something you carried quietly, not something you displayed. I was still telling myself that. Dr. Ellen Marsh appeared at 2:05, moving with the brisk, unhurried energy of someone who had long since made peace with the fact that her time was more valuable than most people's. She was a compact woman in her early 60s, silver-haired with sharp gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that reminded me faintly and painfully of Margaret. "Conrad," she said, extending her hand. "It's been too long. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances." "So am I said. The evaluation took 90 minutes. She walked me through a battery of standardized assessments: verbal recall, pattern recognition, executive function, sequencing, processing, speed, working memory, with the calm efficiency of someone who had administered the same tests hundreds of times and had learned not to telegraph her reactions. I answered every question. I completed every task. My hands did not shake. My voice did not waver. When it was over, she set her pen down and looked at me with an expression that was both professional and underneath it genuinely warm. "Conrad," she said, "you scored in the 91st percentile for executive function across your age cohort. Your verbal recall is exceptional. Your processing speed is that of someone 15 years younger." She paused. "Whoever suggested that you might be experiencing cognitive decline either does not know you or is operating with a very specific agenda." "The latter," I said. She nodded once, as if she had already assumed as much. "I'll have the full written report to Warren by 9 tomorrow morning. It will be formatted for court submission." I thanked her and left. Warren was waiting on my back porch when I pulled into the driveway at 4:30, a second thermos of coffee in his hand, and the look on his face that told me he had news. "Tell me," I said, unlocking the back door. We sat at the kitchen table. Again, it was becoming our war room, that table, the same one where Margaret used to spread out her lecture notes on Sunday afternoons, and Warren told me what had happened at the Palm Nashville at approximately 1:15 that afternoon. Beckett had taken a client to lunch. A potential investor Warren believed someone connected to the crypto venture that was apparently hemorrhaging money faster than Beckett could explain. The lunch had been Beckett's attempt to appear stable and solvent a power meal at his own restaurant, the kind of gesture designed to communicate that a man had resources. The corporate American Express had been declined at the table. "In front of the client?" I asked. "In front of the client, 2 other tables within earshot, and the restaurant's floor manager, a man named Gerald Pruitt, who apparently handled it with as much discretion as the situation allowed." Warren wrapped his hands around his thermos cup. "Which is to say, not very much. Beckett tried a second card. That one was declined as well. He eventually paid with cash. Apparently he had enough on him to cover it barely, but the client left shortly afterward without committing to anything." I thought about Beckett in his charcoal suit, the one he had worn to Sunday dinner, sitting across a white tablecloth table from a man whose money he needed, watching his own card get handed back to him in his own restaurant. "How did he react?" I asked. Warren's expression shifted in a way that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. Gerald Pruitt described him as, and I am quoting directly here, visibly shaken, but attempting to maintain composure. Beckett apparently told the floor manager there had been a bank error and that it would be resolved by end of business. "There was no bank error," I said. "No," Warren agreed. "There was not." I stood and moved to the window. The oak tree had dropped more leaves since this morning, and the late afternoon light was cutting long gold angles across the backyard. I thought about the $4,000 I had been transferring into their account every month for 3 years, the card I had authorized without ever asking what it was being used for, the quiet scaffolding of support I had built under Beckett's life so gradually that he had come to mistake it for the foundation itself. Today he had discovered in the worst possible way that the scaffolding was gone. "What about Sloan?" I asked. Warren set his cup down. "That," he said, "is the more interesting development." He reached into his briefcase and produced his phone, turned the screen toward me, and showed me a screenshot of a text message A message that had been sent from Sloane's personal number to a contact saved only as TR at 2:47 that afternoon, less than 90 minutes after Beckett's card had been declined at lunch. The message read, "He doesn't know about the account in my name. If this goes sideways, I need to know my options." I read it twice. "He doesn't know about the account in my name." I looked at Warren. "How did you get this?" "Travis," he said simply. "Apparently TR is Travis Rourke, the private lender who holds the $120,000 note that Sloane took out without Beckett's knowledge. Travis received that message this afternoon, and given the increasingly complicated nature of his position, decided that sharing it with me was in his best interest." I set the phone down on the table. Sloane had a separate account, a private debt that Beckett did not know about. And the moment the first crack appeared in their plan, her instinct had not been to shore up the strategy or stand beside her husband. It had been to calculate her own exit. There was a fracture running through the middle of their partnership, and it had just gotten wider. I did not sleep well that night either, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness than the one that had followed Sunday dinner. Sunday night had been raw and disorienting, the kind of pain that moves through you in waves and does not ask permission. Monday night was quieter, more deliberate. I lay in the dark and turned the pieces over in my mind, the way I used to turn over acquisition proposals in the early years of the business, looking for the load-bearing points, the places where the structure would hold, and the places where it would not. Sloane's text to Travis kept coming back to me. "He doesn't know about the account in my name." It was the word "he" that I kept returning to. Not they, not we, just he. One syllable that separated Sloane entirely from whatever Beckett believed they were building together, that placed her already on the other side of a line she had drawn privately and quietly, while her husband was still convinced they were partners. I got up at 5:30, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad Warren had left behind, going through the remaining financial threads that still needed cutting. There were fewer now than there had been 24 hours ago, but a few remained: a gym membership, billed annually to a card under my account, a streaming service, a quarterly subscription to a trade publication for the restaurant industry that I had set up for Beckett 2 years ago and forgotten about entirely. Small things. But small things had a way of mattering at the margins, and I was no longer in the business of leaving margins unexamined. I canceled them one by one before the sun fully cleared the tree line. Warren called at 9:47. "Woodhouse," he said without preamble. "This morning." Sloane tried to book a series of appointments, facial massage, the full package, apparently a standing monthly visit she has been charging to the personal card for the past 18 months. I set my coffee down, and the card was declined. She tried again with a secondary card, which was also declined because it was also an authorized account under your LLC umbrella. Warren paused. She was in the reception area when this happened. There were 4 other clients present. The esthetician who handles her regular appointments, a woman named Brianna, according to the spa's front desk, came out personally to inform her that without a valid payment method on file, they would need to reschedule. I thought about Sloane, the careful presentation of herself, the curated Instagram posts Warren had shown me weeks ago, when we first began building the documentation file, the way she moved through the world, as though visibility itself was a form of currency. The Woodhouse Day Spa in Green Hills was exactly the kind of place that mattered to someone like that, not just because of the services, but because of who saw you there, who knew you were the kind of person who went there. "How did she handle it?" I asked. "Loudly," Warren said, and there was something in his voice that was carefully, professionally neutral. She disputed the decline with the front desk staff for approximately 15 minutes. She called the card company directly from the reception area. She told the esthetician that there had been a bank error and asked to be seen anyway on account of her standing as a regular client. He cleared his throat. The spa declined to accommodate her. She left. I said nothing for a moment, not because I had nothing to say, but because something about the image Sloane standing at that reception desk, her composed social media face beginning to slip at the edges, made something tighten in my chest that I did not entirely want to examine. It was not satisfaction, not exactly. It was something older and more complicated than that, the feeling of watching a person discover, perhaps for the first time, that the world they had constructed around themselves was built on someone else's foundation. "There is something else," Warren said. "Tell me." "Dana Whitfield called my office this morning. She is a reporter with the Nashville Banner local investigative desk. She covers financial and business stories primarily." He paused. "She says she has been tracking an unusual pattern of social media posts related to a Nashville area business figure and wanted to know if I had any comment on behalf of a client." I straightened in my chair. "What kind of posts?" Apparently, Sloane has been documenting on her public social media accounts, which have a following of approximately 42,000, a series of what she describes as concerning behavioral episodes involving an unnamed older family member. Shaky camera footage, clips of arguments presented without context. One video that Dana described as showing an elderly man appearing disoriented in a kitchen. Warren's voice went very measured. "Conrad, I believe that elderly man is you, and I believe those videos have been live on her accounts for the better part of 3 weeks." My hand tightened around the phone. 42,000 followers. 3 weeks of curated footage publicly posted, building a narrative about a confused and volatile old man, my face blurred or angled away, just enough to avoid direct identification, but enough that anyone who knew me, anyone who had ever done business with me, anyone connected to the Nashville professional community could piece it together if they looked. This had never just been a legal strategy. It had been a public one. "Is Dana sympathetic or hostile?" I asked. "Cautiously neutral," Warren said. "She is a journalist. She wants the other side of the story. I told her I would need to speak with my client before providing any comment." He paused. "But Conrad, the fact that she called suggests she has already done enough digging to suspect that the narrative Sloane has been building is not the complete picture." I stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the oak tree stood in the thin October light, half its leaves already gone, the bare branches beginning to show through. There was something almost structural about it, at this stage of the season, stripped of everything decorative, nothing left but the framework that had been there all along. "Call Dana back," I said. "Tell her I am willing to speak with her. Not yet, not until we have more pieces in place, but tell her I am willing." "Understood," Warren said. "And Warren, I want everything Sloane posted pulled and preserved as evidence before she has the chance to delete it." "Already done," he said. "I had it archived last night." I almost smiled. In 22 years, Warren Aldridge had never once waited to be asked to do the obvious thing. It was, I reflected, the quality I valued most in him. What I did not tell him, what I kept to myself, as I set the phone down and stood at the window, watching the bare branches of the oak move in the October wind, was that Dana Whitfield's call had shifted something in my thinking. Sloane had taken this public, which meant when the time came, so could I. And I had considerably more to show than she did. Before I go any further, if you are still here with me, drop the number 10 in the comments. That is all. Just let me know you are still listening, because what comes next changes everything. A gentle reminder. This story contains some fictional elements woven in for depth and reflection. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is a perfectly good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. The deed of trust paperwork had been filed quietly on Monday afternoon, tucked inside a routine court submission that Warren's paralegal had hand-delivered to the Davidson County Register of Deeds before the close of business. There had been no announcement, no dramatic gesture, no warning issued to Belle Meade. That was intentional. Warren and I had agreed from the beginning that the less noise we made during the preparatory phase, the less time Beckett and Sloane would have to maneuver. By Wednesday morning, the filing was processed and confirmed. By Wednesday afternoon, Warren had coordinated with the Davidson County Sheriff's Office to schedule enforcement for Thursday at 9 a.m. I did not go. I want to be clear about that. I chose not to be there, and the choice was not easy. Part of me, the part that had written the check for that house that had stood in the front yard with Margaret on the afternoon we handed Beckett the keys and watched her cry. The happy, overwhelmed kind of tears she always tried to hide behind her sunglasses, that part of me wanted to be present for what happened next. Not out of cruelty, out of something closer to witness. The need to see with my own eyes the moment the consequences became real. But Warren had advised against it, and Warren was right. My presence would have introduced an emotional variable that could have been used against me. So I stayed in Brentwood, and I waited, and at 11:23 that morning my phone rang. Captain Harlan Braddock of the Davidson County Sheriff's Office had the kind of voice that sounded like it had been built for delivering difficult news, steady, unhurried, with a slight East Tennessee accent that rounded the edges of hard consonants without softening the substance of what he was saying. Warren had worked with him before on a property dispute in Antioch 2 years ago, and had described him to me as someone who did his job without embellishment and expected others to do the same. "Mr. Hale," he said, "the property at 4714 Tyne Boulevard has been vacated and secured as of 10:51 this morning. I wanted to give you a personal update." "Thank you, Captain," I said. "Walk me through it." He did in the methodical, sequential way of someone who had filled out enough incident reports to think in chronological order. He and 2 deputies had arrived at 9:02. Beckett had answered the door in what Braddock described as casual clothes, unshaven, with the specific dishevelment of a man who had not slept rather than a man who had just woken up. Sloan had been in the kitchen. Lucas, thankfully, had been at a neighbor's house. Braddock had confirmed this before proceeding, because he was, by Warren's account, exactly that kind of officer. The paperwork had been served. Beckett had read it. And then Braddock said Beckett had looked up from the documents with an expression that the captain described with careful understatement as not entirely rational. He said the filing was fraudulent, Braddock told me. Said the deed of trust had been obtained under false pretenses and that he intended to contest it. I informed him that those were matters for the court to determine, and that in the meantime the enforcement order was valid and would be carried out. "How did he respond to that?" I asked. "He put his hand on my arm," Braddock said. There was a brief pause. I asked him to remove it. He did. I closed my eyes for a moment. Beckett had put his hand on a sheriff's deputy during an official enforcement action. It was not assault, not technically not as Braddock was describing it, but it was exactly the kind of impulsive, poorly considered gesture that left marks in official records. They were given 15 minutes to remove personal belongings, Braddock continued. Clothing documents items of clear personal significance. Mrs. Sloan, she packed efficiently. She knew what she was doing. Had a bag already partially prepared, it looked like. Of course she did. Your son. Braddock paused, and I noticed the slight correction in his phrasing, the way he had started to say Beckett, and switched to your son, as though he was uncertain which version of the man he was describing. He spent most of the 15 minutes on his phone, made 2 calls, raised his voice on the second one. Our deputy reported that he heard the words, "Do it now," and "I don't care what it costs," before the call ended. I opened my eyes. "Do it now. I don't care what it costs." "Did your deputy hear anything else?" I asked. "Any indication of who he was calling?" "No, sir. Just those 2 phrases, and then the call ended." He loaded 2 bags into the car. Sloan took Lucas's things separately, in a second vehicle, and they left the property at 10:49. Braddock paused. "The locks have been changed and the property is secured. Warren Aldridge has the new key codes." "Thank you, Captain," I said. "I appreciate the thoroughness." "One more thing," Braddock said, and something in his tone made me focus completely. "Before he got in the car, your son turned back toward the house. Just stood there for a moment looking at it. Then he said something not to anyone in particular, just out loud, the way people do when they're not thinking about who's listening. What did he say? I asked. Braddock was quiet for just a beat. He said the cabin. The line stayed open for a second after that, and I felt something cold and very precise settle into the center of my chest. Because there was only one cabin Beckett would be thinking about in that moment. The one in the Smokies. The one with the safe in the back office, the one that held, as far as Beckett knew, the physical documentation of the original trust amendments and the deed records he had never been able to access through legal channels. The one where I had installed cameras 6 weeks ago and changed every lock except one. I thanked Braddock again and ended the call. Then I sat very still in my kitchen for exactly the amount of time it took me to understand what was coming next and what I needed to make sure was ready when it arrived. Thursday night I drove out to the cabin, not to stay. I was back in Brentwood before midnight, but to check the cameras, verify the locks, and make sure that the one door I had deliberately left with its original key cylinder was still exactly as I had left it. It was. The back office window latch was slightly loose in the way it had always been slightly loose, which I had also left unrepaired on purpose, because a man planning to break into a place he had visited a dozen times would remember that window and would feel, when he found it, the particular confidence of someone who believes he is operating on inside knowledge. The safe was where it had always been, behind the oak panel in the back office. I had removed everything of genuine value from it 6 weeks ago, the night after Warren first called me about the suspicious loan inquiry. What remained inside was a single manila envelope containing documents that were real, but not critical copies of older LLC filings. A property tax statement from 2021 things that would look significant to someone in a hurry and turn out to be useless on examination. And underneath the envelope, a handwritten note on my personal stationery that said, in my own careful handwriting, "I have been watching you longer than you know." I checked the camera feeds from my phone, confirmed all 4 angles were recording, cleanly relocked the front door, and drove back to Nashville in the dark. Travis Rourke arrived at my Brentwood house at 11:15 on Friday morning. Warren had called ahead to let me know he was coming, and I had agreed to the meeting because Travis had specifically requested it, not through Warren's office, but directly a call to my personal cell number that told me he had been doing his own preparation. He was a compact man in his mid-30s, sandy-haired, dressed in the careful business casual of someone who worked in private finance and wanted to be taken seriously without appearing to try too hard. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and shook my hand with the firm, slightly over-deliberate grip of someone who had been taught that handshakes communicated character. "Mr. Hale," he said, "thank you for seeing me." "Come in," I said. We sat in the living room rather than the kitchen. I made that choice deliberately because the kitchen had become Warren's space, the strategy room, and this meeting felt like it belonged in a different register. Warren was present, seated in the armchair to my left, his legal pad open on his knee. Travis set the portfolio on the coffee table and opened it without preamble. "I want to be straightforward with you," he said, which in my experience is something people say when they are about to be approximately straightforward, but not entirely. "I extended a private loan of $120,000 to Sloan Beckett, to Sloan specifically, not to your son, 14 months ago. The loan was secured against what she described as a jointly held investment account." "What investment account?" Warren asked, his pen already moving. "That is the problem," Travis said. He pulled a document from the portfolio and set it on the table. It was a loan agreement printed on letterhead from a private lending firm with a Brentwood address. The account she cited as collateral account number ending in 7741 does not appear in any joint filing between Sloan and Beckett. Based on my own research over the past 2 weeks, I believe it may be an account held in a third party's name. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Travis. "Whose name?" I asked. Travis met my eyes with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was still finding it uncomfortable. The account appears to be associated with your LLC, Mr. Hale, specifically a subsidiary operating account that Sloane appears to have had limited knowledge of through documents she should not have had access to. He paused. I believe she used it as collateral without authorization, which means the loan is secured against an asset she did not own and could not legally pledge. The room was very quiet for a moment. Not the empty, uncomfortable quiet of people avoiding each other's eyes, but the dense, concentrated quiet of three people simultaneously processing the implications of what had just been said. Warren broke it first. She pledged Conrad's LLC assets as collateral for a personal loan she took out, without her husband's knowledge. He said, laying it out in the flat, precise language he used when he wanted something to be absolutely clear. That is fraud, potentially wire fraud, given that the loan agreement was transmitted electronically. I am aware of that, Travis said. He did not look pleased about it. Which is why I am here rather than in a courtroom. I want to resolve this cleanly if that is possible. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked. Travis was quiet for a beat. Because Sloane told me that the account was a family arrangement and that you were aware of it. She was convincing. He said the word with a specific kind of resignation, the tone of a man who had believed something he should have verified. It was only after the missed payment deadline this week, and after she sent me that text message, that I started pulling the actual documentation. I thought about the text message Warren had shown me 2 days ago. He doesn't know about the account in my name. If this goes sideways, I need to know my options. She was already planning to use you, I said. Not as an accusation, as an observation. Travis looked at his hands briefly, then back at me. Yes, he said. I think she was. Warren leaned forward. Mr. Rourke, I want to be direct with you as well. The information you have brought today is potentially significant to a legal matter that is developing. If you are willing to provide full documentation of the loan agreement, the collateral representations Sloane made, and all communications between you and Sloane over the past 14 months, that cooperation would be noted and valued. Travis reached into the portfolio and produced a second set of documents already tabbed and organized. I had copies made last night, he said. I was hoping you would ask. I looked at the stack of papers on my coffee table. The loan agreement, the fraudulent collateral documentation, the chain of communications that Sloane had apparently never considered would end up in anyone else's hands, and felt something settle in my chest with the particular weight of things falling into their correct positions. Sloane had borrowed $120,000 against an asset she did not own, kept it hidden from her husband for 14 months, and when the structure began to crack, her first instinct had been to find an exit rather than a solution. Beckett had called her his partner. Warren called Saturday morning while I was in the backyard raking leaves. I had not planned to rake leaves. I had walked outside with a cup of coffee, intending to sit on the porch steps, the way I sometimes did on weekend mornings, just to feel the air and give my mind room to move. But the yard had accumulated a week's worth of fallen oak leaves, and something about the sight of them bothered me in the specific way that disorder bothers a man who has spent his whole life building structures that hold. So I found the rake in the garage, and I started working. And I was halfway through the yard when my phone rang. Beckett resigned from the Palm Nashville last night, Warren said. I stopped raking. Resigned or was pushed, I asked. Both effectively. The restaurant's operating LLC has 3 partners. Beckett holds the majority stake, but the other 2 partners, a man named Arthur Finch and a man named Dennis Cale, hold enough combined equity to trigger a mandatory buyout clause if the lead partner creates material financial liability for the business. Warren's voice was precise and unhurried, the way it always was when he was walking through documents he had already read twice. The corporate American Express account that was deactivated Monday, it had been used to guarantee a catering contract with a hotel group downtown. When the card failed to process a scheduled payment Thursday, the hotel group flagged it as a default. Arthur and Dennis called an emergency partners meeting Friday evening. I set the rake against the fence and sat down on the back steps. "How bad was the meeting?" I asked. "By Arthur Finch's account, and I spoke with him directly this morning because he called my office before I called you. It was, and I quote, the ugliest 2 hours I have spent in a conference room in 20 years of doing business." Warren paused. Beckett disputed the default, said it was a banking error that would be corrected. Arthur told him that whether it was an error or not, the hotel group was now threatening to pull 3 future contracts worth a combined $400,000, and that the partnership could not absorb that exposure. "So they invoked the buyout clause," I said. "They invoked the buyout clause." Beckett's stake in the Palm Nashville was purchased at a 40% discount to its assessed value, the penalty rate written into the operating agreement for exactly this kind of situation. He walked out of that meeting with significantly less than he walked in with and without the restaurant. Warren let that settle for a moment. He also, according to Arthur, threw a water glass against the conference room wall on his way out. I looked at the half-raked yard the oak leaves scattered across the brown October grass, and I thought about the 14-year-old version of Beckett, who used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I cooked dinner, who used to ask me questions about the business with a focused, hungry curiosity that had made me believe with the particular confidence of a father who wants to believe that he understood what it meant to build something that lasted. My throat tightened in a way I did not try to control. "Conrad," Warren said more gently than he usually said anything, "are you all right?" "Keep going," I said. He did. The buyout payment had gone directly into the partnership escrow account, which meant Beckett could not access it without Arthur and Dennis's signatures, a provision that Arthur, aware now of the full financial picture, was in no particular hurry to facilitate. Sloane's Spa Woodhouse, which she had been operating as a sole proprietorship under her own name, but funding partly through a line of credit tied to Beckett's business accounts, had also lost its primary payment processing capability when the accounts were deactivated. Warren had received a call from the spa's landlord in Green Hills on Friday afternoon, asking about the status of next month's lease payment. "She's going to lose the spa as well," I said. "Within 30 days, if nothing changes," Warren confirmed. "The lease payment is due the 1st of November. I stood up from the steps and picked the rake back up, not because I particularly wanted to keep raking, but because I needed something to do with my hands. "What about Dana?" I asked. "That is the more interesting development," Warren said, and I recognized the phrase because he had used it before 2 days ago when he had shown me Sloane's text to Travis, and it had not meant anything comfortable either time. Dana Whitfield had spent Friday cross-referencing Beckett's public business filings with the Tennessee Secretary of State's office. She was thorough in the way that good investigative journalists are thorough, which is to say, she looked at things that most people would not think to look at, and she looked at them in the order that revealed the most. What she had found buried in a quarterly amendment filing that Beckett's accountant had submitted in August was a change to the listed beneficial owner of the Palm Nashville's parent LLC. The change had been filed 3 weeks before the Sunday dinner. The new beneficial owner listed in the amendment was not Beckett. It was Conrad Hale. He tried to transfer the LLC ownership to my name, I said, slowly working through it. "Without my knowledge." "It appears so," Warren said. "The amendment uses a signature block that matches the forged signature on the fraudulent loan application Miles flagged. Same hand, same ink characteristics, same date formatting." He paused. "Conrad, I believe the intention was to create a paper trail showing that you had taken active control of the restaurant's parent company, which could then be used as evidence in the guardianship petition to suggest you were making erratic financial decisions." I stopped raking entirely. It was elegant in the cold and hollow way that a trap is elegant when you see its full architecture for the first time. They had not just been building a case that I was incompetent. They had been manufacturing evidence that I was actively erratically interfering in Beckett's business affairs, making me look like both the source of his financial problems and the irrational actor who needed to be controlled. Two threads woven together designed to arrive at a courtroom at the same moment. Dana found this on her own, I asked. She did, Warren said. And she called my office this afternoon to ask whether I had any comment on why Conrad Hale's name appeared as beneficial owner of a restaurant LLC that he has never publicly been associated with. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree and sent a fresh cascade of leaves across the yard I had just finished clearing. Tell Dana, I said, that I would very much like to meet with her. Monday morning, my office downtown. Warren called me at 6:47 Sunday morning, which told me before he said a single word that something had happened overnight. He posted a video, Warren said. I was already sitting up in bed, the gray pre-dawn light coming through the curtains in thin horizontal lines. I had been sleeping lightly for a week, the kind of half-sleep where you are never fully under and never fully clear, and Warren's call pulled me to the surface without resistance. What kind of video? I asked. 11 minutes and 23 seconds. Posted to his personal social media accounts at 2:17 this morning. Public setting visible to anyone. Warren paused, and in the pause I heard the particular quality of a man who has read something twice and is deciding how to summarize it accurately without editorializing. He speaks directly to camera. He identifies himself by name. He names you by name. He describes in considerable detail what he characterizes as a pattern of financial manipulation and psychological control that he claims you have subjected him to over the course of his adult life. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my feet on the floor. He names me directly, I said, repeatedly. First name, full name, and at one point your business entity, Hale Properties, LLC. Warren's voice was measured. Conrad, I need you to understand something before you watch this. The video is emotional. He is clearly exhausted, clearly under significant pressure, and some of what he says is incoherent. But interspersed with the incoherence is something that his attorney, when he eventually has one, is going to deeply regret. What did he say? I asked. He spends approximately 4 minutes explaining in specific detail why the Belle Meade property was actually worth more than the forced sale assessment. He cites the original purchase price. He cites the renovation costs. He references the deed of trust arrangement by name and explains correctly how it functioned. Warren let that sit for a moment. Conrad, a man who is the subject of a guardianship petition, cannot simultaneously claim in a public video that he has detailed working knowledge of complex real estate trust instruments. He has just handed us a effectively sworn statement that he understands exactly how your assets are structured, which means he has demolished his own primary argument that you were incapable of managing them. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Brentwood was quiet and still. In the early morning, the neighbors' houses dark, the street empty. A single car moved slowly past the end of the driveway, its headlights pale in the dawn light, and was gone. Archive it, I said. All platforms. Timestamp, metadata, everything. Already done, Warren said. I had it pulled and preserved at 3:45 this morning when a colleague who monitors social media for legal flags sent me the alert. It has been authenticated under Tennessee Rules of Evidence Rule 901 and is ready for court submission. He paused. There is one more thing. There always is, I said, and I did not mean it as a complaint. He cries, Warren said quietly. About 2/3 of the way through, he is talking about his mother, about Margaret, and he starts crying. He says she would not have wanted this. Warren was quiet for a moment. I thought you should know before you watched it. I did not respond immediately. I stood at the window and looked at the empty street and felt something move through my chest that was not anger and was not satisfaction and was not grief exactly. Though it was closest to that, the particular pain of watching someone you love destroy themselves with the same hands they were using to try to destroy you. Send me the link, I said finally. I will watch it before the meeting. I watched it twice. The first time I watched it as a father, which was a mistake because watching it as a father meant watching my son sit in the harsh overhead light of what appeared to be a hotel room. They had been staying somewhere since the eviction. I did not yet know where, unshaven and hollow-eyed, speaking into his phone camera, with the desperate, careening energy of a man who had convinced himself that going public was the same as going forward. He talked about growing up in my shadow. He talked about the business, about feeling like his ambitions were always being measured against mine and found insufficient. He talked about the restaurant, about the crypto venture, about the pressure of the debt, and his voice broke when he talked about Lucas, about not knowing how to explain to a 4-year-old why they had moved out of their house. I stopped the video at the part where he talked about Margaret. I sat with that for a while. Then I watched it a second time as a strategist, and what I saw was entirely different. In 11 minutes and 23 seconds, Beckett had publicly identified himself, publicly named me and my business entity, publicly demonstrated detailed knowledge of the deed of trust mechanism, accurately described the LLC structure, and referenced specific account numbers that a cognitively impaired person could not have recalled or articulated. He had, in his own voice and on his own initiative, dismantled the foundational premise of every legal argument Sloan had been building for 3 weeks. Warren was right. No attorney would survive presenting a guardianship petition to a Davidson County judge after that video existed in the public record. Dana Whitfield was already in the lobby of my downtown office building when I arrived at 9:55 Monday morning. She was younger than I had imagined from Warren's description, early 30s, dark-haired with the alert, slightly forward-leaning posture of someone who was always listening for the sentence underneath the sentence being said. She stood when she saw me and extended her hand. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Thank you for making time." "Thank you for your diligence," I said. "I mean that genuinely." We sat in my office on the 14th floor, the Nashville skyline visible through the windows behind my desk, and I told her what I was willing to tell her, which was with Warren's guidance and present in the room more than she had expected. I told her about the forged loan application. I told her about the fraudulent LLC amendment. I told her about Sloan's social media campaign. I told her about the video Beckett had posted at 2 in the morning, which she had already seen. She asked precise, well-structured questions and took notes in a narrow spiral notebook with a mechanical pencil the old-fashioned way, which I respected. When I had finished, she set the pencil down and looked at me directly. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I need to show you something. I found it Friday night after I called Warren's office. I debated whether to bring it today." She opened a folder on the desk between us. It is a second video, older than the one from last night, posted 8 days ago on an account I almost missed because it was created specifically for this content. The account has no followers, no profile image, and a username that is a string of random characters. She turned the folder to face me. But the voice in the video is Sloan's, and she is describing in detail a plan to have you declared incompetent and have Beckett appointed as your legal guardian, including a step-by-step timeline and specific reference to the man in Germantown who advised her on the petition process. I looked at the printed screenshot of the video and its timestamp. It had been posted on October 4th, the day before the Sunday dinner. Before I reveal what happened that night at the cabin, comment the word "trap" below. I want to know how many of you saw this coming and how many of you had no idea. Just a note worth mentioning. Some elements of this story are fictional, shaped to carry a message that feels worth your time. If you would prefer something different, you are always free to step away right here. What matters is that you choose what is good for you. The call from Braddock that I had been waiting for, not dreading exactly, but carrying with me the way you carry something heavy that you chose to pick up came at 11:48 on Wednesday night. I had not gone to bed. I had known in the particular way that you know things when you have spent enough years reading people and situations that Wednesday night was likely. Beckett had been evicted Thursday. He had lost the restaurant Saturday. The video had gone up Sunday night, which meant by Monday he was fielding calls from people who had seen it by Tuesday. He was living with the consequences of having posted it. And by Wednesday, the pressure of the $340,000 crypto debt and Travis's outstanding note and the complete collapse of every financial structure he had depended on would have reached the point where doing something reckless felt more bearable than doing nothing at all. So I had sat in the living room, with the lamp on low, and my phone on the cushion beside me, and I had waited. The camera app on my phone showed 4 feeds from the cabin front door, back office main room, and the exterior side angle that covered the loose window latch. At 11:19, the exterior feed flickered. Not a malfunction. The motion sensor had triggered. I sat forward and turned the brightness up on my phone screen. The figure on the exterior feed moved with the careful, deliberate slowness of someone trying not to make noise, which had the paradoxical effect of making every movement more visible. He was wearing dark clothing and carrying a small flashlight, the beam held low and close to the ground. He went directly to the side window, the one with the loose latch, the one I had left unrepaired, the one that anyone who had visited the cabin regularly would remember as the weak point in an otherwise solid structure. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He worked the latch for approximately 40 seconds. Then the window swung inward, and he climbed through. The interior feeds picked him up immediately. He moved through the main room without stopping, the flashlight beam sweeping in short arcs, and went directly to the back office. He knew exactly where he was going. He had been here before many times, and the layout was as familiar to him as the layout of a place you grew up in. He found the oak panel. He found the mechanism. He opened the safe. I watched him pull out the manila envelope. I watched him open it, hold the flashlight over the documents inside, flip through them once, then again, more slowly. I watched the moment it was visible, even on a phone screen, even in the grainy, low-light quality of a security camera feed, when he understood that what he was looking at was not what he had come for. He stood there for a long moment, the documents in one hand and the flashlight in the other. Then he saw the note. I had written it on my personal stationery, the cream-colored stock, with my initials embossed at the top, that Margaret had given me as a gift years ago. 7 words in my own handwriting centered on the page. I have been watching you longer than you know. He dropped the envelope. The documents scattered across the office floor, and he took one step backward, and then the lights came on. Not the flashlight. The overhead lights, all of them simultaneously triggered by the motion-activated system that Warren's security contractor had installed 6 weeks ago, and that I had switched to manual override mode from my phone at 11:45, 3 minutes before Beckett came through the window. He spun toward the door. Braddock was already there. I did not hear the arrest happen. I watched it on the camera feed without sound. The cabin's audio recording system was separate from the live feed and would be retrieved later as part of the evidence package, so what I saw was a sequence of images that I watched the way you watch something you have been expecting and dreading in equal measure. Braddock and 2 deputies in the doorway. Beckett with his back against the far wall of the office, his hands up, the flashlight still clutched in his right hand, at an angle that made one of the deputies step forward with a sharp, visible command. The flashlight going to the floor. The handcuffs. I set my phone face down on the coffee table and sat in the quiet living room for a while. Outside, Brentwood was completely still. No wind, no traffic, nothing but the deep, layered silence of a residential neighborhood. At midnight, the kind of silence that has texture to it. If you sit in it long enough. I had lived in this house for 31 years, and I knew every register of its quiet. And tonight it felt heavier than usual, pressing in from all sides with the specific weight of an ending. Braddock called at 11:48. He is in custody, he said. Sevier County Sheriff's Office assisted on site. We will be transferring to Davidson County tomorrow morning for processing. He paused. The camera footage is being secured as evidence. The documents he handled will be processed for prints. Another pause. Mr. Hale, I want you to know he did not resist. When the lights came on and he saw us, he just stopped, put his hands up immediately. I nodded, even though Braddock could not see me. My throat had done something complicated, and I was not entirely confident in my voice. Captain, I said finally. What did he say when the handcuffs went on? Braddock was quiet for a moment, that felt longer than it was. He said, "Does my father know I'm here?" The words landed in the center of my chest and stayed there, and I sat with them, the way you sit with things that are too large and too complicated to move through quickly. Because that question, not a denial, not an accusation, not a threat, just that bewildered, childlike question told me more about where Beckett actually was underneath all the arrogance and the desperation and the terrible choices than anything else he had said or done in the past 3 weeks. He had walked into my trap, and his first thought had been of me. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and breathed. Yes, I said quietly to no one in particular. His father knows. I did not sleep after Braddock's call. I sat in the living room until the lamp beside the couch began to look pale against the gradually brightening windows, and then I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and watched the morning come in across the backyard. The oak tree was nearly bare now, just a handful of leaves still clinging to the upper branches with the stubborn, pointless tenacity of things that do not know yet that it is over. I thought about Beckett in a holding cell in Sevier County, waiting for the transfer to Davidson County. I thought about Lucas, 4 years old, asleep somewhere in a hotel room or a borrowed house, entirely unaware that his father had spent the night in handcuffs. I thought about Margaret and about what she would have said, and I did not let myself stay with that thought for long, because there was no version of it that did not hurt in a way I could not afford right now. Warren arrived at 8:15. He came in through the back door without knocking. We had long since moved past the formality of knocking, and set his briefcase on the table and poured himself coffee from the pot I had already made. And for a moment, we just sat across from each other in the morning quiet. Two men in their late 50s and early 60s who had known each other long enough to understand that some things needed a moment of silence before they needed words. Then Warren said, "Sloan called my office at 6 this morning." I looked at him. "Not for the first time," he said. "She first contacted me 9 days ago, October 7th, the morning after Beckett's card was declined at the Palm." I set my coffee cup down with more care than was necessary. "You have been in contact with Sloan for 9 days, I said. "I have been receiving information from Sloan for 9 days, Warren said, and the distinction was precise and deliberate. Under a structured cooperation framework that I initiated after she sent that text to Travis. I reached out to her through a neutral intermediary, a Nashville attorney named Clifton Reeves, who handles exactly this kind of arrangement, and made it clear that if she wished to separate her legal exposure from Beckett's, there was a pathway available to her. She took approximately 4 hours to respond. I thought about the morning after the Palm, Sloan standing at the Woodhouse Day Spa reception desk. Her card declined, her composure beginning to slip. 4 hours after Beckett's card had failed, she had already been calculating her exit. "What did she give you?" I asked. Warren opened his briefcase and produced a document that was thicker than anything he had brought to this table before. He set it in front of me and I looked at the cover page without touching it. It was a sworn statement, 41 pages notarized, dated October 8th through October 15th, compiled over 9 days of recorded conversations between Sloan and Clifton Reeves. It covered in Sloan's own words, and in chronological order, the full architecture of what she and Beckett had planned: the guardianship petition, the forged loan application, the fraudulent LLC amendment, the curated social media campaign, the plan to use the Sunday dinner as a staged confrontation that Sloan would record and present as evidence of Conrad's volatility. All of it. Documented, sworn, signed. "She gave us everything," I said. She gave us everything, Warren confirmed, in exchange for a cooperation agreement with the district attorney's office that reduces her exposure from 2 felony counts to a single misdemeanor, provided she testifies truthfully at trial. He paused. Clifton submitted the cooperation framework to the DA's office yesterday morning. It was accepted yesterday afternoon, 4 hours before Beckett went through the cabin window. I sat back in my chair. Sloan had been cooperating with Warren for 9 days, while simultaneously living with Beckett, planning with Beckett, and as far as Beckett knew, standing beside him. She had attended whatever emergency conversations they'd had after the eviction, after the restaurant, after the video. She had been present for all of it. And the entire time she had been feeding the details of their plan to the man who was quietly dismantling it. "Does Beckett know?" I asked. "He will find out this morning," Warren said. "When his public defender reviews the prosecution's evidence package and sees Sloan's cooperation agreement on the first page." I tried to imagine that moment, Beckett sitting across a table from a public defender he had met an hour ago, reading the name of the woman he had built his life with on a document that was going to be used to put him in prison. I tried to imagine it, and found I could not fully get there, not because it was difficult to picture, but because somewhere underneath the cold, strategic clarity of the past 2 weeks, I was still his father, and some forms of devastation were beyond my capacity to contemplate with detachment. "What was the piece she held back?" I asked. "You said last week there was something she had that we didn't know about." Warren reached into the briefcase again and produced a single page, a printout of an email chain. "3 weeks before the Sunday dinner," he said, Beckett sent Sloan an email laying out the complete plan. The guardianship petition, the asset transfer, the staged dinner, the forged documents, all of it in writing, in his own words, sent from his personal email account to her personal email account. Warren set the page on the table. He wrote it as a to-do list, numbered items, with checkboxes. I looked at the email. Item 7 on Beckett's numbered list read, "Make sure the dinner video looks spontaneous." My son had written a to-do list for dismantling his father's life, and he had included as item 7 a reminder to make the cruelty look natural. I picked up the page and read it all the way through slowly, and when I set it back down, my hands were very steady and my face was very still. And somewhere behind my sternum, something had shifted permanently, the way a bone shifts when it heals after a break, not weaker than before, but different, with a line running through it that was never going to disappear. "File everything," I said. "All of it. I want the full package submitted to the DA's office before end of business today." "Already in motion," Warren said quietly. Outside, a single leaf detached from the oak tree and turned slowly in the still air before it reached the ground. Dana's article ran on Friday morning. I read it at the kitchen table, with my second cup of coffee, the way I used to read the business section when Margaret was alive. And the mornings had a different texture to them, unhurried, with space around each thing. The article was on the Nashville Banner's front digital page under the headline, "Nashville Businessman Alleges Coordinated Family Fraud in Davidson County." Case and Dana had written it with the precise, restrained authority of someone who had spent 3 weeks verifying every detail before committing a single word to print. She had not sensationalized it. That was the first thing I noticed and the thing I respected most. She had laid out the timeline, the forged loan application, the fraudulent LLC amendment, the fabricated social media campaign, the guardianship petition plan, the cabin break-in in clean sequential prose, citing court documents and public records where they existed, and attributing everything else specifically and carefully. My name appeared 14 times in the article. Beckett's appeared 19. Sloan's appeared 11, with a note at the bottom that she had entered into a cooperation agreement with the Davidson County District Attorney's Office. My phone began ringing at 7:43 and did not meaningfully stop until early afternoon. Former business associates, neighbors, A man I had not spoken to in 8 years who had read the article and wanted me to know he was thinking of me. Dorothy Alcott from next door appeared at my front door at 9:15 with a covered casserole dish and the particular expression of a Southern woman who feeds people when she does not know what else to do, which is the most genuinely kind impulse I know of. I thanked her and meant it completely. Warren handled the calls that required legal responses. I handled the ones that required only presence, the willingness to say thank you, and I appreciate that. And I am all right enough times that it became a kind of rhythm, a way of moving through the day without stopping long enough to feel the full weight of what was sitting on my chest. Reed called on Saturday afternoon. I had not spoken to him since the Sunday dinner, where he had sat at my table and watched his brother press his finger into my chest 11 times and said nothing, done nothing, looked at his plate, and then at the wall, and then at Nora, with the expression of a man who had already decided long before that evening that staying quiet was safer than standing up. I had not blamed him for it, not exactly, but I had noted it the way you note the absence of something you needed and did not receive. "Uncle Conrad," he said, which was what he had called me since he was old enough to speak, even though I was not technically his uncle. His voice was tight and effortful, the voice of someone making a call they had been rehearsing and dreading in equal measure. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said. He talked for 20 minutes. He told me that he had known, in a general way, that Beckett and Sloan were planning something, that there had been conversations he had been partially present, for references he had not fully understood at the time, but that made sense now in retrospect. He told me that he had told himself it was not his place to interfere, that it was between Beckett and me that families had their complications, and the right thing was to stay out of it. He said this without defending it, which told me he had already passed judgment on himself and did not need mine. Then he told me that Nora had cried for 2 days after the Sunday dinner, that she had wanted to call me immediately, and that he had talked her out of it, and that she had not entirely forgiven him for that. "I want to testify," he said. "If Warren thinks it would help. I want to tell the court what I saw." My throat tightened. "I will have Warren call you Monday," I said. "Both of you." Reed exhaled a long, unsteady breath that sounded like 3 weeks of held tension releasing at once. "I'm sorry, Conrad," he said. "I should have said something that night. I should have stood up." "Yes," I said gently. "You should have, but you're standing up now. That counts." Everett came to the house on Sunday. He was 74 years old and drove a 14-year-old Ford pickup that he refused to replace on principle. And he came in through the back door the way he always had since I was a boy, and he was the uncle who showed up unannounced and stayed for dinner and told stories that were always approximately true. He sat down at the kitchen table and accepted coffee and looked at me for a long moment with his pale blue eyes that had seen everything and forgotten very little. "Warren tells me you want me to testify," he said. "Only if you're willing," I said. "I'm willing." He wrapped his large, weathered hands around the coffee mug. "I've been willing since that boy put his finger on your chest. I just needed someone to ask me properly." He paused. "I'm going to tell them about the Meridian contract." I looked at him. The Meridian contract was something I had not thought about in years, a commercial development deal from 1991 that would have been the largest transaction of my early career. A partnership with a Memphis-based firm that would have required me to relocate for 18 months. I had been 30 days from signing when Beckett, who was 4 years old at the time, had been diagnosed with a severe kidney infection that required surgery and 6 weeks of hospitalization. I had withdrawn from the contract without telling anyone the reason, taken a significant financial penalty for the late withdrawal, and spent the next 2 months sleeping in a hospital chair 3 nights a week. Beckett had never known. "He doesn't know about the Meridian contract," I said. "No," Everett said. "He doesn't, but the court will." He looked at me steadily. That boy stood up in front of his whole family and called you a parasite, Conrad. I have been waiting 34 years to tell someone what you actually are." I looked at the table for a moment, because looking at Everett directly was not something I could manage right then without my composure doing something I did not want it to do in front of him. "Thank you, Everett," I said. He made a dismissive sound and drank his coffee. "I saw Lucas on Tuesday afternoon. Sloan had arranged it through Clifton Reeves as part of a separate civil agreement, 2 hours at a neutral location, a park near Vanderbilt supervised by a family services coordinator. I brought a paper bag with 3 books and a small wooden puzzle that I had found in the garage, something I had bought for him 2 birthdays ago and never gotten around to giving him. He ran toward me when he saw me across the grass and hit me at approximately hip height with the full, uncoordinated force of a 4-year-old who does not understand the concept of a measured approach, and I caught him and held him against my chest and felt his small hands grip the back of my jacket, and I stood there in the October sunlight and let myself feel everything I had been carrying at arm's length for 3 weeks. He smelled like soap and something sweet the way small children always do, and he said "Grandpa" into my shoulder with the absolute uncomplicated certainty of a child who does not know yet that the world can make that word complicated. I held on for a long time. When I walked back to my car 2 hours later, my eyes were burning, and my chest was full of something that did not have a clean name, and I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before I was ready to drive. The night before the trial, my phone rang at 10:47. It was a number I did not recognize, a Nashville area code, but not one in my contacts. I almost did not answer. Then something made me pick up. "Mr. Hale." The voice was young and uncertain, and professional in the effortful way of someone who was not entirely sure they were doing the right thing. "My name is Daniel Pruitt. I am the public defender assigned to your son's case." A pause. "I am not supposed to be making this call, but Beckett asked me to. He wanted me to tell you." Another pause longer, as though the young man was finding the exact words he had been given. "He wanted me to tell you that he knows what the cabin note said. And he said to tell you that you were right. That you have been watching longer than he knew. And that he said to tell you he is sorry." The line was quiet. "Mr. Hale," the young man said. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Tell him I heard him." I set the phone down on the nightstand and lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling of the room I had shared with Margaret for 27 years, and outside the Brentwood night was completely, perfectly still. Tomorrow there would be a courtroom, but tonight something had shifted, not resolved, not healed, but shifted in the long and complicated space between a father and a son. Davidson County Courthouse sits on 2nd Avenue North in downtown Nashville, a broad limestone building that has the particular solidity of structures built in an era when permanence was considered a civic virtue. I had been inside it twice before, once for a property dispute in the 90s, and once as a character witness for a former employee. And both times I had been struck by the way the building managed to feel simultaneously formal and human, its high ceilings and marble floors, softened by the ordinary noise of people moving through the business of justice. I arrived at 8:15 with Warren on my left, and Patrice, who had insisted on coming on my right. The courtroom was already half filled when we entered Dana Whitfield in the press row with her spiral notebook, Everett in the second bench behind the prosecution table, with his large hands folded in his lap, Reed and Nora 3 rows back, Reed sitting very straight in a way that told me he was holding himself together by deliberate effort. Dorothy Alcott had come as well, which I had not expected, and she caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, firm nod that meant more than she probably knew. Beckett was already at the defense table with Daniel Pruitt when I took my seat. He was wearing a dark suit that I recognized I had bought it for him 4 years ago for a business presentation he had been nervous about. He did not look at me when I came in. His jaw was set, and his shoulders were held with the rigid, careful posture of someone concentrating very hard on not falling apart. Sloane was not at the defense table. She was seated separately to the right of the prosecution, her cooperation agreement having repositioned her from defendant to witness. She was dressed conservatively, her expression controlled in the way of someone who had made a calculation and was committed to it. She did not look at Beckett either. Judge Harriet Vance entered at 9:02, and the room came to its feet. She was in her early 60s, sharp-featured, with a deliberate economical manner that suggested she had heard every variety of human failing that could be brought before a court, and had developed over the decades a precise and unsentimental framework for evaluating them. She reviewed the case summary, confirmed the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, forgery, unlawful use of a financial instrument, and second-degree burglary, and asked the prosecution to proceed. The assistant district attorney, a focused woman in her 40s named Christine Aldwell, built the case the way Warren had built our preparation, chronologically, specifically, without embellishment. She started with Miles Carver's flagged loan application, presented the original document, alongside the forensic handwriting analysis that confirmed the forged signature. She walked through the fraudulent LLC amendment, the beneficial owner change filed in August, and showed how the same signature characteristics appeared on both documents. She played Sloane's planning video, the one Dana had found posted to the anonymous account on October 4th, the day before the Sunday dinner. The courtroom was very quiet during those 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Sloane's voice filled the room, precise and methodical, laying out the guardianship petition timeline, referencing the man in Germantown, describing the staged dinner as step 1, with the brisk efficiency of someone organizing a calendar event, rather than a scheme to strip her father-in-law of his legal autonomy. I watched the jury. There were 11 of them. The 12th had been excused for a medical issue the previous week, and not replaced in time, a procedural detail Warren had noted and accepted. They watched the video with the specific, concentrated attention of people who understood that what they were seeing was not reconstructed or summarized, but actual, and the expressions on their faces moved from attention to something harder and colder as the 4 minutes progressed. Christine Aldwell then presented Beckett's numbered email, the to-do list item 7, make sure the dinner video looks spontaneous, projected on the courtroom screen in his own font, his own formatting, his own email signature at the bottom. Daniel Pruitt objected to the authentication. Judge Holloway overruled in 4 words. Then she played Beckett's 11-minute video from his social media accounts, the one posted at 2 in the morning on October 13th. She played only 6 minutes of it, the section in which Beckett, in his own voice and with considerable specificity, described the deed of trust mechanism, the LLC structure, and the specific account figures with the fluency of someone who understood these instruments completely. Christine Aldwell paused the video and turned to the jury. The defense has argued that Conrad Hale was experiencing cognitive decline that necessitated guardianship intervention, she said. This video was recorded and posted publicly by the defendant himself 11 days after that guardianship petition was being planned. The court will determine what it demonstrates. Everett testified after lunch. He walked to the stand with the unhurried dignity of a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to lose, settled himself into the chair, and answered Christine Aldwell's preliminary questions in his even East Tennessee cadence without ornamentation. Then she asked him about the Meridian contract. Everett told it the way he told all stories, starting from the beginning, without rushing, building each piece on the last. He described the contract, the opportunity, the financial significance to a 32-year-old businessman in 1991 trying to establish himself in Nashville's commercial real estate market. He described the phone call Conrad had received about Beckett's diagnosis. He described driving Conrad to Vanderbilt Medical Center that first night and sitting with him in the waiting room while Beckett was in surgery. and how Conrad had made 2 phone calls from that waiting room, one to Margaret, one to the Memphis firm withdrawing from the contract, and had not mentioned either call to anyone for the next 30 years. He took a financial penalty of $68,000 to withdraw that late, Everett said. That was real money in 1991. That was a year's operating income for a small business. He paid it, and he never told Beckett why he had walked away from that deal. He paused. He told me because I asked him directly, and Conrad Hale cannot lie to my face. But he never told his son. The courtroom was very still. Mr. Hale, Christine Aldwell said gently, in your assessment over the course of your nephew's life, what kind of father has he been to Beckett? Everett looked at the jury with his pale blue eyes. The kind, he said, that Beckett didn't deserve and got anyway. I pressed my hand flat against my thigh under the table and kept my face still. Sloan testified for 90 minutes. She was precise, cooperative, and thorough in the way of someone who had decided that the most effective form of self-preservation was complete honesty, and who had the intelligence to execute that decision without flinching. She confirmed the planning video. She confirmed the guardianship petition strategy. She confirmed the forged documents identifying Beckett as the person who had produced them with her knowledge. She confirmed the staged dinner, the recording plan, the text message, step 1 is done that Conrad had seen on her phone. She described the $120,000 loan from Travis Rourke, the fraudulent collateral she had used to secure it, and the separate account she had maintained without Beckett's knowledge for 14 months. At one point, Daniel Pruitt cross-examined her with the careful aggression of a young attorney doing his best in an impossible position. He asked whether she had at any point expressed reservations about the plan to Beckett. Sloan looked at him with an expression that was not quite remorse and not quite indifference, but something precisely calibrated between the two. No, she said, I did not. Daniel Pruitt made the best closing argument available to him with the materials he had, which is to say, he argued for leniency on the grounds of financial desperation and personal pressure, acknowledged the criminal conduct, and asked the court to consider the human context. He was 29 years old, and he had been dealt an unwinnable hand, and he played it with more composure than I would have managed at his age. Judge Holloway delivered her verdict at 4:17, guilty on all counts. She sentenced Beckett to 7 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction, with eligibility for parole review after 4 years, served citing the premeditated and coordinated nature of the offenses and the deliberate targeting of a family member as aggravating factors. Sloan received 18 months of supervised probation and a $45,000 restitution order reflecting her cooperation agreement and early cooperation with prosecutors. The courtroom absorbed the verdict, the way courtrooms absorb verdicts, not loudly, but with a collective shift in the quality of the air, a change in breathing and posture, and the small sounds that people make when something large has been decided. I sat very still. Warren put his hand on my arm, briefly said nothing, and removed it. That was exactly right. They brought Beckett past the gallery on his way out. It was procedural. The route from the defense table to the side door passed close to the first 2 rows of benches, and I do not know if it was intentional or simply the geography of the room, but he passed within 6 feet of where I was sitting. The deputy on his left was looking straight ahead. Beckett was looking at the floor. Then, at the exact moment he drew level with my bench, he looked up. We looked at each other for perhaps 3 seconds, no more than that, because the deputy kept moving, and Beckett moved with him. But in those 3 seconds, I saw something in my son's face that I had not seen there in years. Not defiance, not arrogance, not the calculating assessment of a man running numbers. Just a face. Just a 34-year-old face that had started as a newborn in my arms and had arrived through a long series of choices I could not have made for him at this particular moment in this particular room. His mouth moved. No sound came out. but I had known that face for 34 years, and I knew what it said. "I'm sorry, Dad." I held his gaze until the deputy turned him toward the door, and he was gone. Then I gathered my things and walked out of Davidson County Courthouse into the late October afternoon, where Nashville was going about its business in the bright, indifferent sunlight, and I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and breathed the cold air and let everything I had been holding settle into its final shape. I slept that night deeply without interruption for the first time in 3 weeks. Wednesday morning, I called Warren at 7 and told him I needed to amend the will. He said he already had a draft waiting, which no longer surprised me. I drove to his Church Street office at 10, and we spent 2 hours making it final. The new will directed $3.8 million, drawn from the trust and the LLC holdings, to Monroe Hecht Children's Hospital's Pediatric Cardiac Unit, where Margaret had volunteered for 11 years, and to the Brentwood Family Foundation, which supported foster children and orphan services across the region. The remaining $400,000 went into a restricted educational trust for Lucas, accessible at 25, managed by Warren as independent trustee. I also wrote Beckett a letter. 4 paragraphs by hand on the cream stationery with my embossed initials. 1 paragraph about Margaret. 1 about the Meridian contract and why I had never told him. 1 about Lucas and the trust. And 1 that said plainly and without qualification that I was his father and that had never been conditional and was not going to become conditional now. I folded it, sealed it, and handed it to Warren. "When he is ready," I said. "When he is ready," he confirmed. Saturday morning I saw Lucas one last time. He came running across the park toward me the same way he always did, full speed, no hesitation, and threw himself against my chest the way only he could, and held on. He smelled like soap and something sweet, and after a moment he leaned back and looked at me with his serious 4-year-old eyes. "Grandpa, are you going somewhere?" "For a while," I told him, "but I will write to you, and when you are bigger you can visit." He thought about this carefully. "Will there be trees?" "More trees than you have ever seen," I said. That satisfied him. He hugged me once more with his whole body, the total, unself-conscious commitment of a child who does not yet know how to give partial embraces, and then ran back down the path. At the far end, he turned and raised one small hand against the November sky. I raised mine back and held it there until he disappeared around the bend. I left Nashville at 2:15 November 1st, 2025. The mountains appeared 2 hours south, massive, unhurried, indifferent to everything that had happened in the past month and present, long before any of it, and certain to remain long after. I followed the familiar 2-lane road up through the trees and parked in front of the cabin as the late afternoon light broke apart through the branches. The air was cold and clean and tasted of pine and elevation and quiet. I stood on the porch for a long moment, my hand on the doorframe looking out at the ridgeline. 34 years of fatherhood. A month of the hardest work I had ever done. And now this, the mountains, the stillness, the particular peace of a man who had chosen at every difficult turn not to become less than himself. I opened the door and went inside. Behind me, the Smokies held the last of the daylight without effort, the way they had always held everything steadily and without asking to be thanked. I've told you this family story not because I am proud of every moment, but because I believe the truth of it matters. Here is what I know now, standing in these mountains, with nothing but time and clarity around me. Love is not a transaction. I gave freely for 34 years, not to be repaid, but because that is what fathers do. God sees every quiet sacrifice made in rooms where no one is watching. I believe that. I have always believed that. If this grandpa story teaches you anything, let it be this: do not wait until the papers are forged and the trap is set before you protect what you have built. Watch the people closest to you, not with suspicion, but with honest eyes. And if someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. My personal opinion. A child who mistakes patience for weakness has never truly known their parent. I was never a parasite. I was the foundation they were standing on, and they only understood that when it was gone. These are the grandpa stories and family stories that nobody films at the dinner table, the ones that happen in lawyers' offices and courthouse hallways and quiet mountain cabins at the end of everything. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. I read every one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe. The next story is already waiting. Thank you sincerely for staying until the very end.